Do you want to play what is unquestionably one of the most overpowered builds in the game? Do you want to make your groups better simply by having them bask in your presence? Do you want to spend Christmas standing at your door watching Guild Wars 2 players profess their undying love to you, even though they know full well that your husband's in the next room, and slowly coming to the realization that they have only ever loved an imagined superficial version of you, feeling the walls closing in as you realize that with some slightly more ominous music, this becomes the start of every true crime documentary ever written, and that this man in front of you is completely and utterly unhinged? Well, you're in luck. Today, we're covering the absolutely busted Power Quickness Herald. Welcome back, everyone. Power Quickness Herald has become my favourite of the many different support builds that Revenant has access to. You have an incredibly easy time keeping up 100% quickness on your team. You cover off on so many key boons like Might, Fury, Swiftness, Protection, and Regeneration, which makes your group's life so much easier. You can even tweak the build to provide on-demand stability and damage reduction over and above Protection to all your teammates. And with all this, you have access to godlike levels of CC that all Revenant builds come packaged with. It does fantastic damage, it's a fun rotation, and is super simple to play. Not only that, because this build has so many key boons covered, it's fantastic to play in open world as well. Whether it's raids, strikes, fractals, or open world metas, you're going to be making your teammates even better at the game just by having them in your presence. So for now, let's crack on. First up, with our weapons. We'll be using two swords as our best DPS option, and unless you need CC, this is where you're going to be spending all of your time. Sword auto attacks simply offer good damage and apply vulnerability. Sword 2 strikes enemies around you, chills enemies, and deals bonus damage if it only hits one enemy. Sword 3 will make you shadow step around nearby foes, give you a 1.5 second evade, and grant you might on every strike. This is very useful if you need an emergency dodge. Sword 4 applies 8 stacks of vulnerability, does outstanding strike damage, and immobilizes enemies, which lasts even longer the more enemies you hit. Sword 5 will shadow step you to your enemy, grant 8 seconds of fury, and if it hits, will deliver a second strike. This skill can be used to teleport close to enemies when outside of range as well, for a bit of extra mobility. If you run anything that is even tangentially related to Power Revenant and PvE, you're probably going to be running Staff. Our auto attack will just apply some strike damage and heal nearby allies on the first strike. Staff 2 will apply weakness, some damage, and heal nearby allies. This heals for even more if you manage to hit an enemy. Staff 3 gives you a 2-second block, which can be an absolute lifesaver and save you from wasting a dodge. It also blinds enemies at the end of the cast. Staff 4 will heal allies around you, as well as removing 2 conditions. It's also a blast finisher, so you can nab some sweet combo finishes. Staff 5 is why you're bringing Staff. You charge forward, attack 9 times, knock back enemies on each strike, and you even evade while charging forward, just to make this even more overpowered. If you manage to land all 9 attacks, you will do a massive 1350 break bar damage. This lets you hard carry teams when it comes to break bars. The 2 main legends that we're going to take are Glint and Shiro. This will give us the highest possible personal damage while still providing quickness. As a quickness provider, Glint will never leave your bar. This build just doesn't work without it. Depending on the encounter, Shiro can be swapped out for some of your other legends depending on the utility you need. We'll go through some of the specific use cases as we chat about each legend. First up with Glint. Every skill while you're in Glint is a facet skill. These skills you can toggle on once to pulse boons to your allies around you. You can then consume them to get access to powerful active effects, in exchange for giving up these pulsing boons. Through one of our traits, we'll also grant quickness when we consume our facets. We'll also retain the passive effect for a few seconds after we activate these skills. The playstyle of Power Quickness Herald basically boils down to swapping into Glint, using all of your facets for quickness, and swapping back to your other legend while you wait for your facets to recharge. Facet of Nature is a massively loaded skill, and has different effects depending on your current legend. There's a lot to cover here for now, so I'll just focus on the effects that are relevant to Power Quickness Herald. The passive effect while in Glint will grant you an extra flat 20% boon duration to any boons you apply. This is on top of the standard 100% boon duration cap. When you consume Facet of Nature while in Glint, it will also increase the duration of all your allies' boons by 2 seconds, 3 seconds once we buff it with a trait. When we consume this facet, we'll generally always want to do it while we're in Glint. This is for the massive increase in boon duration. The passive effect while in Shiro will grant your allies lifesteal when they attack. This causes Herald to contribute even more damage while you're in a group. We'll be taking advantage of this effect when we get to the rotation section of the video. If you consume the facet while in Shiro, you can strip 2 boons from nearby enemies. You won't use this often, but it's good if you need some clutch boon strip. The passive effect while in Jalis will reduce incoming damage to allies by 10%. This is separate to protection and the 10% damage reduction you get from certain ascended foods. If you start stacking these modifiers, you can really reduce the pressure on your team and have much smoother boss kills. This is a really underrated skill. If you consume the facet while in Jalis, you'll grant 2 stacks of stability to your allies. However, you'll usually use Inspiring Reinforcement for this. The passive of Facet of Light will pulse regeneration to nearby allies, a very useful boon to have. Consuming this will let you ignore all incoming damage and convert it to healing. This can let you just flat out ignore mechanics like the Mind Crush on Deimos. For Facet of Strength, the passive will pulse might to all your nearby allies, and when you consume it, you'll attack twice and grant yourself a 15% damage modifier for 10 seconds. When we come to the rotation, we'll want to maximize the uptime of this buff as much as possible. Facet of Elements will pulse swiftness around you while it's active. When you consume it, you'll lay down an AoE attack that pulses weakness, chill, and burning. It's also a very nice damaging skill. Facet of Darkness will simply pulse fury every few seconds. When you consume it, you'll blind enemies, reveal them, and break stun on yourself. No damage on this skill, but it does have some very nice utility. Facet of Chaos will pulse protection on all your nearby allies. Having protection is going to make your group content so much easier. When you consume it, you'll knock back enemies, deal a nice chunk of damage, and grant super speed to nearby allies. In Shiro, Enchanted Daggers will summon 6 daggers which siphon health from targets that you hit. Riposting Shadows will grant you a backwards evade. Remove all movement and parry conditions and grant you fury. Phase Traversal will port you towards your target, makes all of your attacks unblockable, and grants you quickness. Impossible Odds is the main skill that you'll be using in Shiro. You gain a 50% movement speed increase and deal an additional strike to enemies that you hit. This is just a straight up DPS increase. Jade Winds is a huge AoE stun, but it does cost a large amount of energy. Still, it's useful if you really need to crank some CC in an emergency. In Jalis, your heal skill, Soothing Stone, will remove conditions and heal yourself. You also gain Resolution, which will reduce incoming condition damage by 33%. Inspiring Reinforcement offers amazing group-wide stability and is one of the main reasons you'll think about taking Jalis. Force Engagement taunts enemies, gives breakbar damage through soft CC, and reduces the damage you take from taunted enemies. Vengeful Hammers basically replaces Impossible Odds from the Shiro stance. It also reduces strike and condi damage you take by 20%. Outstanding. Rite of the Great Dwarf is rather expensive, but it breaks stuns for 5 people and gives a massive 50% damage reduction for 5 seconds. All of these different damage reductions through the Jalis line can be stacked on top of each other, which makes this a really nice defensive legend if you need it. Shiro and Jalis are your main 2 legend swaps for this build. However, there are some useful skills in the other legends for some niche situations. In Ventari, Protective Solace is an absurdly long-lasting projectile barrier that you can move around as you need. In Malix, Banish Enchantment provides boon removal, which is super nice for fractals if the no pain no gain instability pops up, and Call to Anguish will pull mobs you land on together for you and your teammates to burst down. If your team doesn't have any pulls, this can be a very good one to bring. The traits for Power Quickness Herald are relatively simple. We basically have a whole bunch of damage modifiers, and then there's one trait that lets us apply quickness. For the Devastation line, as is common with most Revenant power damage builds, the Devastation line is loaded up with damage modifiers to help crank our damage. If you need a bit of extra survivability, you can swap out Swift Termination for Dance of Death. In most group content, this shouldn't be required though, so simply fill out the middle row of traits and move on. Invocation is basically here for some damage modifiers and fury generation. Most importantly, we have the trait Roiling Miss, which increases the amount of crit chance we get from fury, which is a nice little buff. Another handy trait is Spirit Boon. This lets us apply additional boons whenever we swap legends. This is most important when we take Jalis as our legend swap. When we swap to Jalis, we can apply stability to nearby allies, which can be clutch if we need to ignore an incoming CC. The Herald trait line is obviously needed and makes the entire build function. Core Value improves the effect of our True Nature skill when we consume Facet of Nature. This is most often used when we're in Glint to extend the duration of our allies' boons by 3 seconds instead of the standard 2 seconds. Shared Empowerment will allow you to apply might to nearby allies whenever you grant them boons. Note that this also applies to yourself as well. This trait lets you keep up approximately 13 might stacks on your subgroup, which is very nice. Reinforced Potency you get for free as a minor trait and gives you extra concentration and lets you deal additional damage depending on the number of active boons that you have. This is just extra boon duration and damage for free. Draconic Echo makes the entire build tick. This allows us to grant quickness whenever we consume one of our facets. It also lets you retain your facet's passive bonuses for 6 seconds after you consume them. So now you get to keep pulsing the boons for a while, as well as the sweet bonuses from Facet of Nature. We'll make sure to take advantage of this when it comes to the rotation shortly. When it comes to gearing, the main thing we need to work around is our amount of boon duration. The minimum boon duration you need to keep up 100% quickness is 25%, at least with the rotation we'll be talking about today. However, this doesn't leave you with much wiggle room for quickness, especially if your group isn't tightly stacked or if someone needs to run off and deal with mechanics. For this reason, the gear set I'm recommending has 40% boon duration. This results in about 5% lower DPS, but it will make it incredibly easy for you to upkeep quickness on your group. This should cover you for the easy fights where everyone is stacked tightly, and for the sketchy ones where your team runs around like headless chickens. Plus, you get to run just a single gear set, which is very nice. To hit this level of boon duration, we use a mix of Berserkers, Assassins, and Diviners gear, which is shown on screen. I've also linked the build in the description below so you can check back on it later. If you prefer, you could also just run the gear set I recommended for Power Alacrity Renegade in one of my previous videos. Due to the trait Reinforced Potency, you will end up with more boon duration than you need, but you can run the same gear set across both builds. Just a nice option for you, both will work just fine. For runes, we're going to take Rune of the Scholar. We don't need any extra boon duration, and we just want to crank our power damage as much as possible. For our sigils, we're going to be taking Sigil of Force and Air. For food, take whatever variant of sous vide steak you prefer, or any other power and ferocity food. The non-ascended alternative being sweet and spicy butternut squash soup. For our utility, just take Superior Sharpening Stone. Easy peasy. Now for the rotation. I find the rotation on Power Quickness Herald changes a bit as it progresses, due to your skill cooldowns becoming more and more out of sync. So today, we'll go through what the ideal loop is, as well as some of the rules of thumb that will allow you to adapt the rotation as fights go on. Personally, I don't find this to be particularly complicated, it's just that you need to be a little bit flexible. For our opener, we'll start by activating all of our facets except for Facet of Chaos. Very quickly, we'll pop all of our facets for quickness, Facet of Light, Facet of Nature, Facet of Strength, Facet of Elements, and Facet of Darkness. We'll then quickly activate and consume Facet of Chaos, then swap to Shiro. Once we're in Shiro, immediately activate Impossible Odds. Use Sword 2, Sword 4, Sword 5, use 2 auto attack chains, Sword 2, use 3 sword auto attack chains, swap back to Glint. In Glint, we'll start by activating and consuming both Facets of Strength and Elements. Then activate Facet of Darkness, we'll use Sword 2, use Sword 4 and 5 as soon as they're available, activate Facet of Nature and Facet of Chaos, use 2 auto attack chains, or until Sword 2 is available. Use Sword 2, activate and consume Facet of Light, consume Facet of Chaos, use 2 auto attack chains, consume Facet of Darkness, then Facet of Nature, activate and consume both Facets of Strength and Elements, then swap back to Shiro. Now for some quick rules that will allow you to adapt your rotation. We'll want to maximize our uptime of the Facet of Strength buff, so this will be the first and last thing we use when we're in Glint. Facet of Strength and Elements have the exact same cooldown, so pair them up. Activate Facet of Darkness as soon as you hop into Glint, and activate it just before you exit. This lets you pulse some Fury, and you can save the skill as a stun break if you need. Generally, you'll want to use your Sword 2, 4, and 5 off cooldown. However, try not to interrupt your sword auto attack chains if possible. You'll want to consume Facet of Nature just as you are exiting Glint. This lets you get the boon extension from consuming it, and retaining the passive for 6 seconds when you swap to your other legend. This means that your team can make use of the lifesteal or damage reduction from being in Shiro or Jalis respectively. You can skip using Facet of Light every other time you go into Glint, or just use it every time if you need a bit of a quickness buffer. And with that, you're all set to carry your teammates to victory with the sheer majesty that is Power Quickness Herald. It's returned from its Heart of Thorns glory days, even better than before, and I know that you're going to love it. This build offers great damage, covers so many important boons, has tons of utility, and is super forgiving to play. Give Quickness Herald a shot, you're not going to be disappointed. Thank you all so much for watching. If you have any questions or just want to rant about how good Herald is, let me know down in the comments below. Leave a like and subscribe. Also let me know what other Guild Wars 2 builds you'd like me to cover. And with that, I'll catch you all next time.